What's up, dudes? Overnight oats this week. I've been thinking a lot about the troubled teen industry. If that's not a term that you've heard before, it's kind of been in the news the last couple of years. A big story is Paris Hilton has been a big advocate in stopping the abuse at these sorts of facilities, and it's basically places like there's different there's like wilderness ones, and there's ones that are more just like send your kid here and we're gonna give them tough love, and we're gonna fix your kid with all the problems. If you caught your kid smoking weed, if your kid is having behavioral issues, and you can pay to send them to this place. Or a lot of states, the foster care systems, whenever there are kids with behavioral problems, they just ship them off to these facilities. And what do you know? There was a whole lot of abuse, a whole lot of really ugly power dynamics, and so I've been paying attention to that. And there's been a couple of podcasts recently that have kind of delved into them, as well as like their origins and where they came from. Namely, TrueAnon and Last Podcast on the Left each had pretty good series on. Synanon was kind of like the culty type therapy thing that started it, and they had this whole process called the game, and it's just like you yell at each other and you like break each other down, and you're supposed to fix each other. And it started out being like this rehab thing, but then the troubled teen industry kind of took the same ideals and has been running them ever since. And so they're pretty awful. Like, there's the stories that come out of here are really just pretty despicable, and it raises so many pretty cogent examples of the way that like power structures work, and how systemic abuse happens, and how there's so many things that go into these things existing, so many factors. And it just really illustrates the ways that, and when we're talking about systemic issues and systemic abuses and systemic failures, like when you're involved in the systems, there's different levels of being culpable and different things that are done to get you involved in it, to get you to believe in it. Especially a lot of these troubled teen camps, like there's a good amount of the staff members were youth who went through the process. And there's probably people who say they had good experiences and that it helped them, but there's pretty egregious things that have happened here. And like recently, I think this was only a couple years ago, Utah has a super high percentage of these, and there's some really awful ones. I think Idaho does as well. And the Oregon like foster care system said like it's too bad here. We can't send our foster kids there anymore. And so that raises the question, like, okay, how many years have we been sending foster kids into these really awful places that are just traumatizing and basically prisons? Like, you'd have to do your own research and like look at the stories. But it just makes me think about this, especially because it's not like you're in the juvie system. Pretty much the only qualification is if a parent decides to send a kid there because they deserve it. And so maybe it's kids who are facing drug or alcohol issues, and then it's also could just be kids who are like talking back, and the parent is super strict, and they are just someone with a very authoritarian parenting style. And it's like, well, we got to send you off here and then you'll get good. Um, but it's interesting too, because especially as there have been these revelations about these places and more of an understanding of how abusive they can be, there are a lot of parents who like feel awful about sending their kids there. And there is this whole apparatus of like marketing these places. Like, last podcast on the left was talking about how Geraldo Rivera and a lot of like daytime TV people and nighttime TV hosts, they had this panic about teenagers and about all the kids are doing drugs and listening to rap music and smoking weed and acting out. And so there became like this hysteria around, oh, if your kid's bad, like you got to send them to this place or else they're going to die on the streets. They're going to ruin their life. And we need to, these people, they're good. We're paying like tens of thousands of dollars a year. Like, we need to send the kid there. Or it could be parents who just like really don't give a shit about their kid and just send them off. because they're annoyed with having to deal with all this stuff, and you just basically send your kid off to this boarding school and you don't care what happens. But a lot of these schools too, like they really limited what these kids could even say to their parents. And so there were certainly kids who were there, teenagers, young adults, who were there, and their parents really did not know how awful it was. And so it just makes me think about all the different ways that, like, yeah, if the parents send their kid there, like, they're somewhat complicit and there was an abusive thing, like, they're involved, but it doesn't mean that they're fully responsible, because maybe they got convinced because they were watching TV from someone they trusted, and they're so worried they don't want to ruin their kid's life, and so we'll send them off and they'll go up to ship shape, but maybe not address what was leading to their reckless behavior, or why they got a drug addiction, or if there's any trauma or anything. It's not, yeah, these things were just like warehousing kids all across the country, and just makes me really sad. And I think I remember at least hearing of some people going to these sorts of places when I was younger in high school. And yeah, it just makes me wonder, like, obviously not every single person who was involved in these institutions had like a horrible time. Um, and that's the other thing about like systemic abuse and um, places that do harm and do damage. It's not like an all or nothing thing. And it's sort of the thing like, well, that guy was always nice to me. He can't be an abuser. And which is obviously silly. Um, but yeah, it breaks my heart that these places exist in America, and we have such a culture of, oh, what's the word? Such a culture of punishment and of just a very carceral culture, honestly, and thinking that um yeah, quote unquote tough love is gonna fix things, when in reality a lot of times that tough love can be abuse. And yeah, so those are my thoughts. I'm very grateful that I didn't have to experience anything like that. Like any yeah, I was just always lucky to have very supportive and loving parents and caretakers and guardians and everything. So yeah, my heart just breaks for all the pain and suffering in the world, at all. All right, bye dudes.